Gorgeous space, isn't it? This room is just as grand as some of Milwaukee's finest churches, but it's not a shrine in the religious sense. This is the grain exchange, and it was built as a temple to wheat. The exchange is all that's left of a formative and almost forgotten chapter in Milwaukee's history. Now a popular spot for weddings and proms, this room was once the city's economic heart. It was on this floor that buyers sampled wheat raised in Wisconsin and neighboring states. It was on this floor that massive quantities of farm products were bought and sold. Fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a trade. This was not simply a local exchange. Prices set here had a global impact, and Milwaukee became a world center of the grain trade. But that didn't happen overnight. Milwaukee became a wheat capital only after backbreaking labor, enormous risk, and fatal damage to one founding father's reputation.
Wisconsin's farmers worked the hardest. Year by year, acre by acre, they cut down the forests and plowed up the prairies. Row by row, seed by seed, they planted crops they had known back east, especially wheat. Wisconsin joined the Union in 1848. Barely a decade later, the state was the second largest producer of wheat in the country. Milwaukee was an obvious market for the farmers' surplus grain, but it was hardly the only one. Lake ports from Algoma to Kenosha coveted the same trade. In order to keep its early lead, Milwaukee had to develop its natural advantages. That meant, first of all, improving the harbor. Battling constantly with waves and weather, workmen dredged the old river mouth and built 2 seawalls of stone and timbers. In 1857, they did it all over again, creating a new harbor entrance a half-mile north, closer to the city center. The downtown riverbanks were soon lined with docks, and it wasn't uncommon to see a schooner under full sail in the heart of the business district. When the major improvements were done, the Milwaukee Sentinel bragged,
"The harbor, thus constructed by the liberal and enlightened enterprise of our own people, is undoubtedly the best on the lakes. It is the safest, most accessible, and roomiest harbor on all these inland seas."
But a harbor was only half the battle. In order to realize its destiny, Milwaukee needed some way to bring Wisconsin's wheat to the city's docks.
That meant railroads. And here we meet a familiar figure, Byron Kilbourn. The West Side's founder was convinced that Milwaukee's future depended on iron rails. He saw them as arteries of commerce that would pump the wealth of Wisconsin into the state's economic heart, Milwaukee. In 1847, Kilbourn began work on Wisconsin's first rail line. His progress was steady. In 1850, the Milwaukee and Mississippi Railroad made its maiden run to Wauwatosa, chugging along at the breakneck speed of 30 miles an hour. "These are things to be wondered at," wrote a visiting reporter. Kilbourn's track layers kept pushing west, bridging streams and crossing swamps, building up low spots and cutting down high ones. In 1857, 8 years after work began, they finally reached the Big River at Prairie du Chien. Although his railroad was a success, Byron Kilbourn had an uncanny ability to alienate people. In 1852, he was fired by his board of directors. Not to worry, Kilbourn promptly founded another railroad, the La Crosse and Milwaukee, and aimed it toward the Mississippi on a more northerly angle. The railroad crossed the Wisconsin River at a settlement named with typical flair, Kilbourn City. Today we know the place as Wisconsin Dells. Byron Kilbourn did everything possible to bring in money, selling stock to farmers, courting investors back east, and borrowing from towns along the route. In 1856, he went too far. Kilbourn desperately wanted a land grant that was to be awarded through the state legislature. Leaving nothing to chance, he offered $10,000 in railroad bonds for every vote in the state Senate, and $5,000 for each in the Assembly. Only 6 legislators said no, a sure sign of the era's malnourished ethics. Kilbourn spread around another $300,000 in bonds to newspaper editors, business leaders, and the state's governor. Even in an age of easy virtue, outright bribery was simply too much. Kilbourn won the land grant, but he lost his good name. As rumors began to swirl, he claimed that he had simply been doing his civic duty, fending off a Chicago railroad that wanted the same grant.
The emergency was upon us and required the most prompt and energetic action to meet, and for one, I was not disposed to shirk or shrink from any effort or responsibility in my power to secure a favorable result.
Forced to the witness stand, Kilbourn continued to display a cast-iron conscience. When asked why Governor Coles Bashford had taken the bribe, he replied with disarming candor,
I believe he accepted it for the reason that he thought the company could well afford to make such a donation without doing it any material damage, while to him the sum was large enough to confer a real benefit.
The railroad could afford it, in other words, and Bashford could use it. Ethics had no place in the discussion. As news of the land grant scandal spread, Wisconsin's reputation was badly tarnished. Magazines like Harper's Weekly depicted the state as an open market for corrupt politicians. Although he lost neither his freedom nor his fortune, the land grant scandal brought Kilbourn's public career to an inglorious end. He eventually retired to Jacksonville, Florida, where he died in 1870, still affluent, still unrepentant. It was there that Kilbourn remained until 1998, when his body was brought north again and reinterred in Forest Home Cemetery. The entrepreneur finally came to rest in the city he had helped create, with boundless energy and a stunning lack of scruples.
We might argue with Byron Kilbourn's methods, but there's no mistaking his achievements. The 2 railroads he founded were the only cross-state lines in Wisconsin. They acted like funnels, pouring the upper Midwest's agricultural wealth through Milwaukee's harbor and on to the markets of the world. Milwaukee prospered as a point of exchange, a classic port city. Raw materials went out and finished goods came in. No settlement in Wisconsin could hope to compete.
Chicago was Milwaukee's real rival. The 2 cities had been neck and neck during the schooner era, but railroads changed the balance of power forever. Ideally positioned at the foot of Lake Michigan, the Windy City was a natural hub for transcontinental rail traffic. Chicago soon became freight handler to the nation, and then America's second city. Without railroads of its own, Milwaukee might have withered in the deep shade of Chicago, growing no larger than Manitowoc or Sheboygan. But rail networks enabled the city not only to survive, but to flourish. The volume of wheat passing through Milwaukee swelled to a flood. Grain elevators, not smokestacks, dominated Milwaukee's skyline. The grain trade became the city's economic engine, supporting everything from flour mills to shipyards. By the early 1860s, Milwaukee was the largest shipper of wheat on the planet. And so Milwaukee grew. Between 1846, the year it incorporated, and 1860, an interval of just 14 years, the city's population nearly quadrupled. Milwaukee's 45,000 residents made it the 20th largest city in America, bigger than Cleveland, just behind Detroit. Although the streets were still muddy, Milwaukee was definitely putting on urban airs. Before the 1850s were out, the city could boast 7 daily newspapers, nearly 50 churches, and the elegant Newhall House, one of the finest hotels west of New York City. Milwaukee's first horse car line, a George Walker project, was shuttling riders across town. The first telegraph crackled to life in 1848, and the first gas lights flickered on in 1852. These were the wonders of the age, but growth had its less savory side. The 1850s also witnessed a serious pollution problem, a rising crime rate, and spectacular political corruption. But most people focused on the positive. A Boston reporter was impressed.
The rapid growth of the towns and cities at the West has always been a matter of wonderment, but the advancement of this city has been almost magical. The growth of the place has been constant and rapid until now it presents the appearance of a city of at least half a century's existence.
Milwaukee's founders had always envisioned their settlement as a marketplace, a center for buying and selling the fruits of the earth.
That is precisely what happened. Sending trains to the west and ships to the east, Milwaukee traded on the harvest of its hinterland. From those seeds, the city grew, and Milwaukee is still going strong 150 years later.